Welcome, friends, to another of our monthly Global Capitalism presentations. As always, this evening is presented jointly by the Left Forum and by Democracy at Work. We present them as a way of summarizing and focusing the ongoing research that particularly Democracy at Work is engaged in producing through its media productions and so on. I want to apologize. We've had some scheduling adjustments having to do with organizational shifts last year, 2023, but those are behind us, and we anticipate no further scheduling adjustments going forward. The topic today is Europe. Where is Europe? What is happening? And obviously, we wouldn't have talked about this if we didn't think very important things are happening. And they're happening to a very important part of the world. Arguably, the last several thousand years have given that part of the world, Europe, an outsized importance and influence on events across the globe. And it has been the focus, if not the center, of much of recorded history. We think that is changing now in a way we have not seen for a very, very long time. Indeed, when I thought about a title for today's program, the one that I ended up with, although I'm not stressing it because I don't want to depress folks, is Europe 2024, Disunity, Decline, and Despair. It is negative. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. And I don't think I would be much use to you if I did pretend otherwise. After all, most of the people running the societies, the political leaders of Europe these days, are very busy talking as if they were in an infinitely better situation than in fact they are, as you will see as we go through this argument. Europe is the most important ally the United States has. That's another reason to give it attention. And Europe is still an important player, even if the role it now plays is the one we're going to show you as we go through. Very important that people understand it, and it's a very underappreciated part of life around the world. It's a part of the world that gets very little attention compared to what are now the major global political and economic players, which tend to be the United States, China, Russia, and so on. Indeed, they're all part of this story of the disunity, decline, and despair circulating all around and through Europe. Before I jump into the topic, though, I want to respond to a flood of communications from many of you asking me to comment on the extraordinary televised interview by Tucker Carlson of Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia. I'm not sure exactly what it is you kindly thought I might say about it that would be new or different, given how much attention it has already gotten. So here are a few very quick responses. I did watch it. I did take notes. I did find it interesting. I didn't particularly find it interesting because of anything that was new or a bombshell that Mr. Putin revealed. If there were these new things, I didn't catch them. Most of the important points he made, I have seen made either by him or others in the Russian government, or still others outside the Russian government, for months now. What was new and different was the spectacle of a well-known American reporter, Carlson, interviewing for a long time the leader of Russia. That is very rare. And by the way, that's one of the most important things about this event, that something which shouldn't be rare has been rare. Well, why shouldn't it be? The United States is effectively at war with Russia through a proxy, Ukraine. Russian soldiers are fighting with Russian equipment with the backing of the Russian government in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian military, with lots of financial, material, and personnel support from the United States and its European allies, is fighting against the Russian army. That's a warfare situation. And the American public, like the Russian public, like publics everywhere, need to know and deserve to know as much as possible what is going on here, what the different sides want, believe, assert, claim, fear, so that we can all make as intelligent a decision as possible about whether to allow this horrible killing and destruction to go on or not. And yet the sad reality is that for reasons I've never understood and do not admire, to say the least, the American public is deemed by the American media and the government to neither be able or to deserve to hear and see what the other side thinks. I find this just a shade above childish. It's what I call the advertising mentality that has extended into an area where there shouldn't be advertising. When war is involved, when destruction is involved, when people being hurt or killed is involved, we need to know honestly what's going on. We need to hear all the relevant sides of the issue. We make up our own minds, of course, but we don't do it faced with advertisers who tell us only what they want us to know and hide from us what they don't want us to know. It's true, I begin with the assumption that all the goodness doesn't reside on one side and all the badness on the other. I outgrew that idea when I was a little kid, thanks to my parents and wise adults around me. I don't want to go back there, and I don't think most people do. I understand that Mr. Putin, unlike, say, Mr. Biden, will have a different view of what's going on in Ukraine. They are at war. They differ. I get that. I would like to hear what they have to say so that I can make up my own mind. I have not had an opportunity to hear what Mr. Putin has to say at any length. That has not happened, which is why Tucker Carlson did that. It gave him a jump as a journalist on something he knew, and we all kind of do, would be a hot item for people to see. We're adults. We don't need to have our government worry that we might be taken in. Is that possible? Sure it is. We might be taken in by Putin. We might be taken in by Biden. We might be taken in by Trump, and continue on down. We're pretty mature, and in our country, politicians give us lots of practice to avoid being taken in by liars. So thank you, Mr. Carlson. You did a service. And I say that, and I presume all of you know that Mr. Carlson and I could not be more different in our political interests, commitments, loyalties. This is not about that. This is about a sad reality that we live in a time where the governments, instead of informing us more about the urgent differences that cause war, choose to use the war as an excuse to tell us less. There was great wisdom in what I believe was an American journalist who wrote years ago, "The first casualty in any war is the truth," which means you have to work harder to get it. I understand a little bit better what the Russian perspective is and why they're doing what they're doing. Doesn't mean I agree with them. Doesn't mean that I don't believe what our president tells us. I'm gathering perspectives, which is my job as a citizen, and which ought to be the job of a free press, especially one that pats itself on the back for being a lot freer than it actually is. Okay, now to Europe. Europe has been a central part of the world for a very long time. You can go back at least as far as Rome, the time when, because of something happening in Europe, Christianity and Rome and the church, we literally date our years. We are in the year 2024 because of a dating process that goes back to an event celebrated in European culture as the beginning of recorded time. Yes, we know there was time before that, but that's a sign of the significance that the Christian calendar played as part of the role of Europe. Europe was a place of budding nation states very early. Europe was a place of efforts to unify diverse populations early in human history. Not the only place, but an important one. Europe was dominant for the last 1,000+ years. It had certain advantages geographically, particularly Britain, the island off the coast. Technologically, the seafaring skills that an island population often develops. Europe became the colonial master of most of the rest of the world, unifying in a very unequal way the whole planet, which became Europeanized as far as the Europeans could arrange it. Other people were subordinated. Other people were ideologically influenced and shaped. And Europe was calling the shots much of the time. Europe has been a very important place. It's where the Christian tradition really took off. It's where the Christian tradition exploded into the split between Catholic and Protestant, with all of the historic effects of that split that have played themselves out over many, many centuries. Yeah, Europe has been central to the world in a way that it is not anymore. And that is becoming harsher and sharper and clearer every day, which is indeed one of the reasons why it's our topic today. Today, Europe finds itself a junior partner in a world that is changing, particularly the economics of the world. Two enormous powerhouses of economic strength are emerging to shape and dominate the world economy. There's the one that's been around a while, the United States, and its very much junior allies, mostly European, but also Canada and Japan. But on the other side, another economic powerhouse, mostly China, People's Republic of China, plus its allies, the so-called BRICS nations that include India and Russia and now 10 or so others. Those are the two world economic powers. I'm barely mentioning Europe. Yes, Europe is the ally of the United States, but it's the junior ally. It is not what it once was. Far from being the colonial master, it's really more and more looking like Europe is the colony of the United States. And if it isn't the colony of the United States, it's beginning to look like its option is to become a colony of the other side. You know, in earlier transitions, Europe was able to maintain its power. Ancient Rome was a slave economic system that eventually collapsed and gave way to an altogether different economic system called feudalism. The Church, the Catholic Church, and Europe as a geographic designation played a dominant role in both the slave and the feudal phase of European history. In other words, Europe's dominance survived the transition from slave to feudal. And again, Europe's dominance survived in the later transition from feudal Europe at the end of the medieval period to the new system, capitalism, that comes in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries. Europe's power, Europe's importance, Europe's dominance survives these momentous transitions. But not now. Europe is not surviving. Europe is not emerging as the third pole in a global economy of US, China, X. Europe isn't the third pole. Europe is a junior partner of the American pole, which means that Europe, whether it likes it or admits it or not, has allied itself, joined itself to the declining world economic power, not to the rising one. It isn't hooking itself up to China. It is holding on desperately to its subordinate position to the United States. Nothing illustrates that more than the war in Ukraine, which literally forces us to watch. This last week or two, I've been watching, as you have, as the United States Congress, our parliament, basically decides that funding the war in Ukraine is not the important thing we once were taught it must be. It is not going to be funded the way it was. It may not be funded at all, and there's a significant number of our elected representatives who want that, to stop funding it. Meanwhile, in Europe, they are spending more, even though when this war started, the two positions were the opposite. Europe was very nervous, understandably, about having a war in Europe. The United States was all ready to go. Now the roles have been reversed, and the Europeans are hung out to dry with the financial responsibility for something that the United States is backing away from. Wow. If you needed an example of being subordinate in an alliance, you got it right there. Right there. So now I want to take you through the aspects, some, not all, we don't have the time, but the aspects of Europe's disunity, decline, and despair. I start with the disunity only because That is a stark difference between the United States and China on the one hand, large, geographically dispersed, unified populations. Yes, they have their splits, they have their divisions. But relative to Europe, we're not looking at 20 countries with different histories, different languages, different. The level of disunity that Europe has been unable to overcome is obviously a crucial part of this story. Europe's strength for those many centuries of slavery and feudalism and capitalism turned into Europe's weakness. Too little unity, too late. Can't fight the Chinese, can't fight the Americans if you're broken up into all these little warring countries. No, instead of being a power yourself, you compete with one another for the patronage of the United States, which keeps you in that subordinate position as surely as anything could. So we're going to begin with the Ukraine. How does the war in the Ukraine illustrate, exemplify, and worsen Europe's predicament? Well, it is so obvious, they're so stark, that what I'm about to tell you is a commonplace of conversation in Europe, and has been now for over 3 or 4 years, starting even before the Ukraine war, but tremendously intensified by that war. And again, gets far too little attention here in the West, in the United States in particular. Here, the important thing is not the war itself, the military war, but the sanctions, the measures taken in the West that were designed and were explained as such to bring Russia to its knees economically. These measures included Europe no longer buying oil and gas from Russia as they had been doing in large quantities, particularly the powerful economic engine of Europe, which was Germany. By far the most important, powerful, large, successful capitalist economy in Europe. What the sanctions did by cutting off exports of Russian oil and gas meant that they deprived Europe of cheap energy, oil and gas, running your factory, running your office, powering your farm equipment, producing your fertilizer, and all the rest. With scarce oil and gas, because the Russians shut off the tap. And by the way, why did the Russians? Because the Westerners wouldn't buy it, tried to limit the price of it for a while, took all kinds of measures to hamper the value of the Russian currency, hit them that way economically. I'm assuming many of you know that story. I want you to follow the logic, the bouncing ball. When you cut back on the source of cheap energy, you make energy expensive in Germany and in many other parts of Europe. And that means that the producers of cars, like a Volkswagen or anything else, the production that uses energy, which all production does, in Europe now becomes more expensive because they have to pay higher prices for the energy. And so they charge higher prices for the product. And then they discover they can't sell the higher priced product because people around the world don't want to pay higher prices and are not interested in hearing the story about why Germany's exports are now more expensive. Germany cannot sell its industrial output, and neither can industrial enterprises located in the Netherlands or France or Italy or fill in the blank. Industries across Europe cut back. They can't keep the employment of millions of workers because they can't sell the output, because the cost of the energy going into that output requires pricing the output in such a level that the market won't buy it. And you know how those industries survive? They move production to where energy prices are not going up. Why not? Because they didn't buy oil and gas from Russia in the first place. And where is that, pray tell? Answer: the United States. Yeah, Canada. It turns out that there are parts of the world that were not affected by cutting off cheap energy from Russia. And they've done quite well, thank you, like the United States. Even Russia turned out to do reasonably well. Why? Because they found an alternative place to sell their oil and gas. India and China, above all else, but the BRICS countries too. They solved their problem, leaving the Europeans, here we go, high and dry. The Europeans became the ones who denied themselves by joining in the sanctions program designed in and by the United States against Russia. Europe shot itself in the foot economically. It did what its master, the United States, told it to do at enormous expense, and the United States is enjoying somewhat better economic situation of the last 2 or 3 years of this war than Europe, at the expense of Europe. If I had more time, I would explain to you that Russia is also doing well. Russia's economic growth in the year 2023 was greater, not only than that of Europe, was much greater, but it was greater than that of the United States, too. They solved the problem of how to grow their economy during a war better than anyone else who participated in that war. You may not like this, you may not support it, I'm not asking you to. But pretending that that isn't happening just makes you confused, because that is what's happening, and that's therefore what's affecting and shaping the decisions of other people. What else hampered Europe? Now it gets a bit more complicated, but nothing that anyone can't follow. When energy prices shoot up, so does the price of everything else, because everything requires energy to be produced. So you get an inflation around the world. And governments around the world took steps to stop the inflation. Now, they could have taken dramatic, radical steps like wage price freezes or rationing systems. 2 or 3 years ago, when the inflation was really heating up, I spoke publicly about that, including at these sessions. But they didn't do that because the people who run European governments are now overwhelmingly, with a few exceptions, very conservative. They don't want to take radical steps. You know what they do? They raise interest rates. Very conservative. But of course, that means it costs more to borrow money. What does that mean to an industrial capacity, an industrial capitalist in Europe? It means that in addition to the burden of higher energy prices, they now have higher interest rates for any loans they may require. Another disadvantage. when they don't need another disadvantage. It was too much for the Europeans. They could have taken a different step, but they didn't. They marched lockstep with the Federal Reserve in the United States, which refused to talk about wage price freeze or refused to consider any rationing system, only spoke about raising interest rates as if that were the only anti-inflationary policy that the world had ever seen, which is not true. So now Europe was getting whacked by high energy prices and high interest rates. It was too much. But we're not done. One of the things Europeans had begun to do already before the war in Ukraine was to notice that their populations were getting older, that they were having a harder and harder time competing in the world because of the advantage of other countries who had a younger labor force, had more workers available. China was one of those. Even the United States was one of those. So the Europeans did what capitalists often do in that circumstance. They open the door to immigration. They take advantage of the fact that their colonial countries are far behind, live on a much lower standard of living, are desperate for a material improvement in their lives, and will, if they get half a chance, leave Asia, Africa, and Latin America in order to try to get into the European economy. Good, said Angela Merkel in Germany. Let's bring in Middle Easterners, Turks, North Africans. Same was done in other countries, if not quite on the scale of Germany, bringing in vast numbers of immigrants. The United States did that too, particularly across its southern border. And of course, this has, as it always has, the perfectly predictable result of throwing the populations already here, the descendants of earlier immigrants, into a condition of great anxiety that they're going to lose the jobs they fought hard to get to the new generation. No one is guaranteeing that that won't happen. No one is making sure that opening the door to people now is not closing another door to people who've been here. And if you don't provide such a guarantee, you can't be surprised if the people that are already here are not friendly to immigrants, don't want to see all of that. Oh, you can wave your finger and urge people to be more open to multiculturalism, but you are playing a sleazy game. You're not worried about your job or your situation. You are convinced it's not yet vulnerable. But wait till your jobs are disappearing. You will discover the virtue of the very arguments you ridiculed not so long ago. Europe is torn apart now, and I choose my words carefully, by a fight over immigration. A working class, desperate as it watches industries cut back, shut down, leave, as it watches its capitalist leaders talk about Europe not being a place to do business. You have to go where energy is cheaper, or loans are cheaper, or labor is more abundant. They know what that language means. And then to bring in large numbers of Afghanistani people, Syrian people, Turkish people, Iraqi people, or whatever. No, no, no. They know what this is about. They've been there. They've done that. They know the game. And so now you get politicians who see an opportunity that they never saw before. ride the wave of anti-immigrant anxiety. Here in America, we know the game. That's Mr. Trump from day one. He has his parallels in Europe. Mr. Orban in Hungary, and many others. So now we have a working class bitterly focused on immigration, abandoning the old socialist, unionist political parties that the working class in Europe used to support, because they have a more urgent thing: stop the immigrant, save my job. And if the old socialist and leftist parties won't do it, there are new fascistic parties that will. The party in Germany that is now the number 2 party. The Le Pen forces, a power force on the right wing of French politics. The recent election in the Netherlands, and on and on. The signs are everywhere, strangling up progressive politics in Europe, making the situation impossible. All the old leftist politics and policies and parties are in disarray around immigration, leaving the government to the right wing. And who are they? The people who think everything the United States does is correct because the United States is doing it. So the Europeans are all competing with one another to be the new American support country. Now that England is in such terrible trouble that the United States takes them for granted, doesn't have to worry about them, Germany, France, Italy, and Spain look over each other's shoulder, wondering which of them is going to sell out to be the new United Kingdom for the United States next. Europe decided to live and work after World War II under the umbrella of the United States military. Okay, you can make that choice. But if you do, you don't have your own defense industry. Or if you have one much smaller, you're relying on the United States, just as they are in Ukraine right now as I speak to you. And you know what? Then you don't get the benefit of a defense subsidized by the government, which is it can afford research and development. Many of the important technological breakthroughs of the last half century have been achieved by government subsidy working through the defense or war departments of countries. Russia and China have such an operation going big time. And the United States, that's the biggest example in the world. And you know who's not doing it to a significant extent? Europe. Yeah. And that's why technologically they're behind both the United States and the Chinese-Russian alliance. No, Ukraine has shot itself in the foot. It is now suffering beyond all words. Well, I used to say beyond all words, period. But watching what is going on in Gaza shows you yet another breakdown of the system where it isn't working and allowing the destruction of people that's not necessary. Had Mr. Tucker Carlson been able to interview Mr. Putin 2 years ago, 3 years ago, regularly, maybe the pressure for a negotiated settlement would have been greater than allowing an entire country to be decimated, which is what's happening slowly to Ukraine and quickly in Gaza. Ceasefire in both places would make a lot more sense, above all for the people who live and suffer there. Okay, the second way I want you to see or get at Europe's decline has to do with the resurgence of an ideology that we saw last in Europe when it was threatened once before with historic decline. The Great Crash of 1929, known in the United States as the Great Depression, also hit Europe devastatingly in Britain, France, Germany, Italy. You cannot make sense of, you cannot understand the rise of fascism in Europe other than by virtue of the Great Depression. It hits in 1929. Hitler is invited to form a government in Germany in 1933. One leads to the other. Europe was threatened with collapse. In the last two national elections in Germany, before Hitler is given the government, the combined vote of the German Socialist Party and the German Communist Party was about 50%. The German working class was split. And the growth rate was obvious that within the next year or two, if conditions continued, the left would become the next government. And the left in Germany at that time, both the socialists and the communists, were governed by their commitments, publicly stated, to a Marxian alternative to capitalism. Wow. Francisco Franco in Spain, Mussolini a little earlier in Italy, had also seen the society of their time, Italian and Spanish, threatened in a way that had never been threatened before, this time by socialists and socialism. And so they felt a fascist alternative had to be created, and they did. And they arrested the socialists and communists. They deported many. They imprisoned many. They killed many. Fascism promised to the people of Germany, Spain, and Italy, and there were fascist movements in other countries too, but they promised them a return to the stability of before. We will overcome the Great Depression. We will overcome what threatens Europe now and rebuild. Mr. Trump didn't invent the idea, make America great again. Hitler's slogan was to rebuild the Third Reich. Yeah, to go back to the great German Empire earlier. Same idea. And why now? Well, because fascistic politicians have something they can use against the socialists. For most of the last 50 years of the 20th century, socialists were very powerful in European governments. Why? They kept winning elections awfully often because they were in favor of the social welfare state. They were in favor of guaranteed pensions. They were in favor of free health care, which they established in every European country. They were against capital punishment, which they abolished in every European country. They were in favor of free education, and on and on and on. And that was what the people, the working classes, wanted, and that's why socialists won. Fascists were associated with the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, of Mussolini's reign, and of Hitler. So how could fascists, including people who call themselves neo-Nazis, lest anyone be misled, how could they have a chance today? Because they found something to do an end run around socialists. They found this immigration issue. They could tell the people of Europe what they half knew, what they half feel every day, the despair, the decline, the disunity, and say we can overcome it if we simply cleave to our, get ready now, Christian white culture. Should sound familiar to an American audience because we have exactly the same thing here. Our problems are different, but they're serious. Yeah, we are one of the great powers, but we are also in the United States threatened by a new world order in which the United States is going to play number 2, not number 1. And that is having very parallel events. So Europe is caught. Its politicians are the handmaidens of the United States, will do whatever the United States tells them. They have to bring in the immigrants because their country's economies can't survive otherwise, but they can't do that because the mass of their own working class is too threatened by that, which gives an opportunity to the fascistic politician. They're stuck. They can't move. And it feels that way in Berlin and Paris and London and Rome and Madrid. Young people don't know what to do, where to go, what to believe. It's a time of great anxiety, as it is in the United States as well. And as all of this plays out, there's the relentless drumbeat of the economic system. What do I mean? China is knocking down all the economic walls. Europe is getting ready for the arrival of the Chinese automobile. Mass-produced automobiles at an enormously cheaper price than anything that can be done in Europe. VW knows it. Citroën knows it. Fiat knows it. Ford and GM know it. And there's nothing they can do unless they change the rules of the game, which they're trying to do. Hold back the technology being pioneered in China. Losing proposition, but they're trying. Hit the Chinese with tariffs. Hit the Chinese with they're trying to hold back. It's not working, but it's something, and they don't know what else to do. The Chinese smile. They're cashing in on European history. They know that the rest of the world isn't going to go with the United States and Europe because those are the old colonial powers, and they haven't forgotten in those parts of the world. China doesn't come with any baggage. It never was a colonial master of theirs. And so the jobs of European workers are threatened by the sheer process of the growth of the Chinese. And this is spreading to India and Brazil. And it's the New World economic order imposing itself step by step on the European reality. Well, what do the Europeans increasingly do? Well, some of them espouse nationalism. They kind of meet the fascists halfway. Okay, we're going to now run our economy not along the lines that we used to, following the U.S., free trade, globalization, neoliberalism, open everything up. That's not working anymore. So now we're going to be nationalistic. We'll follow the United States by banning Huawei from producing the telephones that our military personnel might use. Economic nationalism, practiced for your country or for a few countries you're connected to, replaces economic liberalism. Europe is going in that direction, and thereby building a bridge between the old leaders trying to hold on and the new fascistic anti-immigration groups. We'll see how that works out. One of the ways it's also working out is that nobody accepts or trusts anything anymore. The mass of people see the leaders doing what the United States wants in a way that is childish. How long do you think you can convince the masses of Europe to be afraid of the Russians to the point of slavishly following the Americans? Not that far. That's not going to work real well for a very long time. More and more groups within Europe are going it alone, demanding help to get through an economically difficult time with no end in sight. Best example, the last month or so, of the European farmers driving their tractors to the edges of Berlin or Paris or Madrid or London, protesting the fact that their farms are not enabling them to make a living. They have higher energy prices. We've already been through that. They face high interest rate. We've been through that. They have this added problem that people's concern about climate change and pollution have restricted what they can and cannot do with fertilizer and chemistry and all the other things they need to make a living off the land. It's too much. They can't survive, and so they do what's left. They mobilize their people to stop normal social life, to put the tractors out there on the highway so that the trucks can't get by, the people can't get to from work, to from school. The society stops. And what do they demand? Help. Help us. We will not allow business as usual if you do not help us. So what does this government of right-wing sycophants for the United States do? Country after country. Macron in France, Schulz in Germany, and on and on. They take the mass of people's tax money and they hand it out to the farmers in improved subsidies, in cash to offset their higher energy prices that they have to pay, or the higher interest costs they have to cover. You know what this is? That's taking money from one part of your population to close the protesting mouths of other parts. And you know what lesson that teaches? It lessons don't be the ones that it's just paying the taxes that the government takes. Be the ones making the protests so you get those taxes given to you too. The society breaks apart. That's what the lesson of the farmers' demands and the government's responses to them. That's what they teach. And notice the one thing that no European government now in power will even consider. It's just like the United States. No tax on the rich, no tax on corporations. No. Can't go there to solve the problem. You can't say to the super rich, we're going to take 2% of your wealth. It'll still leave you the richest people in our society, but that 2% we can help get us through a difficult time. Nope. And you know the irony is? That's turning the mass of people against these governments. And it's not yet clear where the mass of people are going to go. In England, it's gone so far that it is clear. The election scheduled later this year will dump the Conservative Party after many years of its catastrophic mishandling of the British economy and dump a desperate economy into the hands of the Labour Party, which has no plan or program to solve these problems either. But it was the conservatives who scapegoated Europe and told the British, if you vote to quit Europe, it'll all get better for you. They did. They quit Europe, and nothing got better for them. That's what these parties now offer. Scapegoats. Everybody can shut the door on immigrants, or shut the door on Europe, or shut the door, fill in the blank. Doesn't solve your problem because you don't talk about your real problems. That's left to commentators like this one. Because the rest is make-believe. The rest is a Europe and the United States, but it's mostly Europe right now, unable, unwilling to face its own rising crescendo of problems. Keir Starmer in the British Labour Party has no solution. Neither do most of the other left-of-center political parties. They talk about having the government come in and do some social welfare. They've been doing that for a century. That's no longer enough. That's not a change. That's not a reorganization. That's not a response to the network of problems I've tried to summarize. Europe is declining, and Europe is disunified internally in its countries now, as badly, if not more, than among one country relative to another. That's why despair is the mood overcoming more and more people. The irony of ironies, the excluded political player in all of this, the left, the traditional working class left, the backbone of the British Labour Party once upon a time, and of the socialist and communist and other anti-capitalist political parties in all of Europe. They may yet surprise us all by inheriting this unbelievably depressing mess. Meanwhile, the world watches and says to itself, it cannot understand how you could destroy a country like Ukraine, which is what the last 2 years have been doing, any more than you could have imagined the level of mass human destruction in the Gaza Strip. These are signs of a society that is unable to analyze its problems, define its different perspectives and needs, and work out compromises, which, however imperfect, however temporary, do at least prevent the mass slaughter, maiming, wounding, starving of tens or hundreds of thousands of people. We thought, we who are Europeans, and I count myself among them. I was born in the United States, but my parents were European. We thought we had learned lessons of where not to go to solve our problems when we saw what World Wars I and II did. But it turns out we haven't learned the lessons yet. Maybe by looking at them a little harder in the face and with a little more honesty and a little less advertising mentality, we'll be able to see enough to stop continuing on a road as disastrous as the one we are on. Thank you all for your attention. I appreciate it. I'm glad that we are back on schedule, and we will look forward to announcing to you and presenting the next monthly Global Capitalism presentation. Thank you.